City News 24/7. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Mississauga Mayoral debate hosted by Food Banks Mississauga. My name is Mark McAllister, senior journalist and political reporter for City News. We are thrilled to have everyone here with us tonight, live on City News 24/7 and online at citynews.ca. And a warm welcome to all of you here who are joining us here at the Food Banks Mississauga facility as well. Tonight we have a number of things underway, including a number of themes. We have 4 mayoral candidates joining us. The criteria used for participation in this event included having a platform on poverty alleviation and who received a minimum level of 5% support as determined by voting intention in polls conducted to date. Let's get to our introductions. First and foremost, at the podium to your left, Dipika Damerla has spent 5 years as a councillor for Ward 7, and before that was the MPP for 7 years, including some of that time as the Minister of Seniors Affairs. Next to her, Mr. Brian Crombie is the Chief Operating Officer for TerraCap, a real estate investment company. He spent time as the President of the Mississauga Arts Council and is currently also the host of a radio talk show. Stephen Dasko was elected as councillor in 2018, Ward 1 representing Port Credit, and was re-elected in 2022. Prior to running for office, he was a technology company executive. Alvin Tedjo was elected to council for Ward 2 in 2022. He was previously the Director of Government Relations at Sheridan College and served on the board of his local Ratepayers Association, among other things. There is one absence tonight that we need to acknowledge based on the polling so far. Carolyn Parrish was invited to attend but has respectfully declined to participate in all debates at this point. We're going to get to opening remarks right away. We're going to invite candidates to share their remarks. At this point, you will have 1.5 minutes per person. We're going to start with Dipika Damerla.
Thank you. I'm Dipika Damerla, and I'm running to be the next mayor of Mississauga. I want to thank Food Banks Mississauga and City News for organizing this debate, where we get to discuss important issues in this mayoral election, including the affordability crisis and the housing crisis we are facing. Before I get into my remarks, I have a question. The question is for Carolyn Parrish. Carolyn, where are you? Carolyn, you want to lead Ontario's 3rd largest city, but you're hiding, you're missing. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid you will make inappropriate comments and continue to embarrass yourself and reveal who you are when you speak in public? Or are you afraid to answer questions about your severance checks? Whatever it is, this is not leadership. Leadership is about showing up. Leadership is about telling people what your ideas are for making this city a better city and their lives better. That's the kind of leader I am, and that's the kind of mayor I will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Brian Crombie.
When I got here tonight, they were kind enough to take me a tour, and they said that there's 58,000 distinct people that use a food bank in Mississauga every year. That's 8% of Mississauga. That's a tragedy. This morning, Metamorphosis, a group that was formed as an outcome of the Fair Share Appeal, put out a report that said that we have $868 million less in funding for social services from the provincial government than the average urban centre in Ontario, and that we're dead last in our funding. Last night, CBC, I understand, had a listening thing with 60 people, and they asked, first off, what do you like about Mississauga? And I don't know if this for a fact, but I was told by several people that people struggled thinking about and saying what they actually liked about Mississauga. Taxes are up, houses are unaffordable, transit is terrible. We've been talking about all-day two-way go for 25 years. I think we've got to ask a fundamental question. Have these people on stage and the one that Dipika Councillor Damerla, said earlier, have they been doing a good job? Is Mississauga a better place today than it was in the past? And I don't think it is. I've lived here for 24 years. I've been chair of the Mississauga City Summit. I've been president of the Mississauga Arts Council. I've been involved in politics, albeit from the back room. And I think that your current councillors, your current city council, are not doing a good job. And to promote one of them to be mayor is wrong. The Leafs made it to the first round. You know what they did? They said, that's not good enough. We don't want to be mediocre anymore. And they fired the coach, and they're going to do more changes. In business, if people had this kind of performance, they'd fire people, and they'd start with someone new and fresh. We need some radical change in Mississauga. Brian Crombie on June 10th. Please consider it. Go to briancrombie.ca and check me out.
Thank you, Mr. Crombie. Stephen Dasko.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for having us here tonight. Food Banks Mississauga is something that is going to be you've heard a lot of it. You're going to hear a lot more about food banks because of the situation that is going on right now. Has been happening. There's no end in sight. I've been a councillor for the past 6 years, and I was proudly and humbly re-elected with over 70% of the vote. The reason why I say that is because I get results. We need a mayor who has a heart, a leader who's vocal and visible, a mayor who's going to be committed to serving all of our communities, and somebody that actually shows up to do the job. A leader who's accessible, collaborative, and one who's going to take new opportunities, bring them into the city of Mississauga. In the years ahead, we're going to redefine who we are as a city. We're no longer going to be that bedroom community. We want to have a city that's got housing needs for all, that are looked after, with new local jobs and opportunities. I want a Mississauga that has more affordable services for our seniors, including establishment of a Mayor's Seniors Advisory Panel. Since being on council, I've worked closely with our local food bank, the Open Window Hub, ensured My Way kept its paper tickets, and arranged funding with the Region Appeal for an In From the Cold program, and also crisis workers that would be brought down into Mississauga. I'm committed to helping and ensuring that we have a city with a heart that not only cares for its most comfortable, but those that are most vulnerable, and for those that struggle with hunger, homelessness, mental health, and dependency issues.
Thank you, Mr. Dasko. That's your time. We'll move on to Alvin Tedjo.
Well, good evening, everyone. All the hundreds of people who are here tonight and the thousands hopefully watching at home. It's incredibly encouraging to see so many people engaged in our city, in the future of our city. And we have a stage tonight where we're standing in front of the Mississauga Food Bank that has grown in unprecedented ways. And Megan talked about the stats in terms of how many people need to use this place and how many different service providers are being supported by this. And I got to tell you, I think one of the jobs as the next leader of the city of Mississauga is to try and get Megan unemployed, is to try and get food banks to no longer be necessary in our city. Because this is a travesty. This is telling us that we've failed as a society to support people. We need to have a more affordable city. We need to have more affordable housing. We need to have a safe community. We need to have a transit network that makes sense. When I talk to my kids, and I have 3 young kids who are 9, 11, and 13, about what they want, where they enjoy living their lives in this city, I think about my own past and how my parents came to Mississauga with the idea that this was a place that they could raise a family, where they could start a business, where they could afford a home. And my wife and I chose Mississauga for the same reason. But I can't imagine a Mississauga right now where my kids can do the same thing, where they can live in the community that they grew up in. Until we address the affordability issue, until we address the need of places like this in the food bank. I'm Alvin Tedjo. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thanks to each of you for your opening remarks. Now we're going to dive into some of the themes that have been outlined for tonight. This is the opportunity for us to dive right in to some of the issues that Food Banks Mississauga has determined are key in deciding the future of the city and the quality of life for those living here, and who best will help deliver that as well. Our first theme is food security and affordability. Food insecurity is on the rise, up over 200% since the pandemic, and the use of food banks supports are an indication of housing insecurity and homelessness. Food banks rarely receive public funding and have historically relied upon charitable donations and unpaid volunteer staffing. So our first question to each of you is, this is from Peel Lived Experience Roundtable, the cost of all food has risen a lot during the pandemic. Some have had to make a very hard decision of feeding themselves or their kids or their pets. So the question is, as mayor, how will you meet those people's needs now and keep people fed so they can remain housed to stay healthy in jobs, in school, and in training as well? We'll start with Mr. Crombie.
With me? Fantastic, thank you. So I think there's two. Number one is this issue I talked to you about in regards to Peel not getting its fair share. If we're getting $868 million less than the average of Canadian urban centres, these people on Peel Council have not done their job. They have not done their job. Why would you elect them again and give them the opportunity as mayor to go and get what, less than $868 million? So if we're not getting our fair share of funding, that has got to be the number one thing. You got to make sure that we demand that. And two of them have been very involved in the Liberal Party historically, one very involved in the Conservative Party historically. They've got the connections at Queen's Park, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. So connections at Queen's Park may not be the answer. Maybe you got to go and you got to demand, you got to protest, you got to say, this is unfair. Mississauga deserves its fair share. Why hasn't it happened? So that's number one. Number two, and hopefully we'll get to this, the reality is a mayor, a council can't do anything about the cost of food, but they can do something about the cost of housing. And I'm told over and over again that food bank usage is the most in the first week and the last week of the month, because that's when people skimp on their food bill so that they can get their rent paid. The only way that you're going to have food security is get housing to become more affordable. That's the long-term solution. The short-term solution is electing people that are going to get our fair share for Peel. The long-term solution is electing people that are going to cut the red tape, the regulation, the time to get approval, cut development fees, get Mississauga building again. That's what we need. We need more supply. We need more affordable housing, and they're not doing it.
That's your time. Thank you, Mr. Dasko.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, we have to recognize that the face of hunger is not all the same, and everybody has to have it addressed in a different way. This is really what we're after, but also recognizing that the funds have to be there. That if you're running out of money by the end of the month, you can't pay your rent, you're relying on the food bank. This is where, again, having a mayor that can come in, that can work with the federal and provincial governments to make sure that we've got other ways of getting that income that's coming in to help top up people that have that gap between what they're affording to pay for rent and what they can actually find shelter for. So this is one, but also coming out and finding out to make sure that we've got predictable funding that's going to come in for our food banks that are going to meet the forecasts of what the food banks, the professionals, are out there telling everybody, this is what we need. These are the crises. These are the alarm bells. We need to wake up, and we need to be there to answer those requests. This is something that I do right now with my local food bank at the Compass, for example, and also for Food Banks Mississauga. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, because we truly need the other levels of government to pay their fair share, because it's true. It's been mentioned here once, it'll be mentioned again. The Metamorphosis Group just came up and put out a report that was shocking, but at the same time not shocking, because this is something that, quite frankly, has been advocated for a long time. We do have probably some elections coming up of other levels as well, and there's an opportunity to continue to do some advocacy. But leadership, this is what matters right now, and that's why you need somebody that's dedicated to Mississauga to get these issues fixed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tedjo.
You know, this is one of the most disturbing things that we've had to face, is that food insecurity. You think about the basic needs that you need shelter, you need food, you need security. And talking to neighbors, just going around canvassing, I met a middle-income family who thought of themselves as middle class, two working-class people with a couple of kids. And they said, almost with tears in their eyes, that they never imagined themselves being someone who would ever, ever, ever need to go to a food bank. They never imagined that. But that's where we are right now. We're struggling. Our people are struggling more than they've ever struggled before. The cost of living in the city is too high. There are only so many levers that we can pull, and we can beg and demand and stomp all we want, but we also have to take responsibility for what we can do ourselves. What can we do as a city to make life more affordable for people? I've worked with Megan, with the food bank, at the Region Appeal to get millions of dollars more funding for the food bank in the last year. I've worked to lower transit fees for seniors and for kids. I worked on making missing middle housing more accessible with fourplexes. And my plan talks about freezing property taxes for everyone in the city of Mississauga so they can save hundreds of dollars a year. We can't change the price of gas or groceries, but we can do this. We can lower taxes for low-income seniors and for small businesses so that people have the ability to pay for the goods and the food that they need, and that's in my plan. Thank you.
And finally, Ms. Damerla.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking food banks across Mississauga, across the GTA, across Ontario, frankly across Canada, for the incredible work you're doing. Thank you so much. Here's a little known fact. I actually served on the board of this organization when it was called Food Path. I don't know if anybody remembers that when it was called Food Path. I was on the board here, and I remember spending some hours volunteering, shelving, and all of that stuff. So thank you. I know how hard you guys work. And it's, of course, like everyone has said, it's completely unacceptable that 8% of Mississauga is now relying on food banks. People with full-time jobs are relying on food banks. And then there's another statistic. 30% of people living in Mississauga are struggling to put food on the table. I was knocking on doors and I met a lady, and she said, I am having to choose between buying food for myself and my pet. Think about that. This is not the Mississauga we want. And so there are some things that City Council can do in the short term to help Food Banks Mississauga and all of the food banks. Mayor Crombie had an exceptional food drive. As mayor, I would continue that. I would build on that. I know there's been some conversations about finding space for the food bank so that they don't have to pay the rent. I believe your annual rent is $1 million. If you could save you money on that, and I'd work very hard to do that, that's a lot of food that can be then provided to people in need. Community gardens. I love community gardens. You know, we have this whole Queensway Trail. One of the first things I ask staff is, why don't we have community gardens along the Queensway Trail? It's an idea worth exploring. But at the end of the day, let's admit it, all of these are Band-Aid solutions. We really need to be thinking about the root cause. There are many root causes, but there's one that as the mayor, thank you, that as the mayor of Mississauga, I would be able to address. One of the reasons
I'm going to cut you off right there. That's your time for this question.
Okay.
We're going to move on. Part of our debate tonight involves individual questions for some of the candidates as well. With each theme, we're going to make a point of asking each one of the candidates a separate question before we open up the floor for other people to speak as well. In this theme, we're going to go to Mr. Stephen Dasko first. And the question is, because the number of people living in poverty in Mississauga is increasing, and now there are thousands more relying on food banks, how do you propose to lower the cost of living to address this growing problem as soon as possible?
Well, first of all, there's no magic bullet. We can all talk about making promises about things that we're going to drastically reduce things overnight, and that's just not going to happen. But this is what we do as a community, is we rise together. So bringing in more money into our food banks to make sure that they have that, bringing in more goods, but also bringing in the opportunities for people to be able to get back on their feet. And this is something to create an environment of there's hope for tomorrow. There truly is, and this is what we have to rise to as well. And that's also bringing in for so long, we've always talked about the province has done this or the federal government has done that. The reality is we're all in this together. We all have to sit down. You need a leader that's going to sit down and that's going to pull everybody in, and let's make those decisions. Let's make things work. Let's bring in the right people to the table to make sure that we are addressing the actual needs for right now, not dipping into reserves of municipalities, not going into the last dime that a food bank might have to try to make a month work, or especially for somebody that is insecure, whether they're from their housing point of view to food insecurity. This is something that has to be dealt with from the root. And this is what I'm looking for, but also to make sure that we've got getting those shovels in the ground for buildings that we've approved to make sure that we can get that done right away. And that's what I've done right now as a ward councillor. We've actually got 300 affordable units that are being built right now, an additional 68 that was just built. And more is needed, absolutely, but it's how we get that job done and make things work, because we have to think differently, because what we're doing right now is not good enough. Thank you.
With each theme, we're also going to be opening the floor for debate, allowing 5 minutes for the candidates to debate one another on this specific theme. A reminder, food security and affordability and the urgency. I cut Ms. Damerla off earlier. I'm going to let her begin the debate. You've got 5 minutes to speak with each other.
You know, the single biggest thing I can do as mayor to address income insecurity is keep your property taxes low. And that's why I've made a very responsible commitment. I am saying that for the next 2 years, I will make sure that your property taxes remain at or below the rate of inflation. I am not promising to freeze property taxes, because the only way you can freeze property taxes is either you cut services or you raid the reserves. I am not willing to raid the reserves and bankrupt the city and lose our AAA credit rating. So I've made a very responsible promise, which is to keep your property taxes as affordable as possible. The second piece that I want to do is free my way for seniors. That's a firm commitment that I have made. And finally, there's a proposal to reduce your stormwater charge by up to 50% if you make certain green investments. So these are some of my ideas to reduce, to alleviate the income insecurity that I have. It's a responsible plan, and I do think that anybody who's suggesting that you can freeze services, freeze taxes and increase services, that's never been done in my lifetime. How can you freeze taxes and increase services? And of course, I guess you raid the reserves, and Brampton tried that, and now their reserves are down to zero. So I think that's a very bad plan. Thank you.
My guess was that was aimed towards one candidate in particular. However, I did see Mr. Crombie's hand first, and then we'll open it up to Mr. Tedjo.
There is a silver bullet. With all due respect, there is a silver bullet. Sunday New York Times this past week had a story about Austin, Texas, and it said it dramatically increased the amount of supply of housing, dramatically reduced the rental rates, and dramatically reduced the people that went to food banks. And how did they do that? They did it by, number one, municipal councillors really went to work on reducing the red tape and regulation and the time to get approval. So developers came to Austin to want to build. Number two, what they did is they reduced development fees. Toronto has eliminated development fees on fourplexes. I can't tell you, there's a lot of people in Toronto that are now looking at doing fourplexes. Just passing a fourplex law didn't have any interest for people in Toronto, but you take away the development fees, it does. The provincial government is talking about taking away development fees for assets less than $400,000, rental properties or condominiums. That gets people interested. I'm a developer. I know what happened when the federal government reduced the GST on purpose-built rental. Developers started coming to the table. Government has an obligation to make building housing more affordable. With the development fees that Mississauga's got today, with the red tape and regulation, with it taking 5 to 7 years for these people to actually get anything approved. It takes longer to push the paper around City Hall than it does to build a building. You should be mad about that, and that's what's causing the problem. So there is a silver bullet, sir. You guys get some efficiency. You got two people here running for mayor that haven't been invited on stage that are efficiency experts. They know that we could be more efficient. You get more efficient, developers will come to the table. Doing the way it is right now, you know what the answer is? Same old, same old. You're going to get the exact same result if you elect one of these or the other councillor to be mayor. I got to promise you that.
Mr.
Think
Crombie,
about something new.
I will cut you off there. Mr. Tedjo, you have the next word.
Thank you, Mark. We absolutely have a plan that allows us to freeze everyone's property taxes for the next 2 years without raiding the reserve. We're going to use 20% of the reserve. And then we're going to do what Hazel did. We're going to keep building in this city. We're going to expand the tax base. We're going to meet our housing targets and get money from the federal government and the provincial government by meeting our housing targets. That's how we continue to grow this city. That's how we continue to help people pay to live in this city. I'm proud of that plan. I'm also proud of the plan that we had to unlock fourplexes, and if you're paying attention, we recently also waived the DCs for the fourplexes so that we can get more housing built. The more housing we build, the lower your taxes can stay. That's what we're going to do in this city.
We do have just a few seconds left. Mr. Dasko, I know you had one other thing that you wanted to add.
I do. Well, thank you very much. And first of all, I can appreciate that you're trying to grandstand a bit, but what you're saying is just, there's a lot of bunk there, I'm sorry. I will tell you, can we always do things more efficiently at the city? Absolutely. That's also why I'm calling for an audit of exactly how we do things to move things along. But that is also insulting to a very good planning staff that we have. And I will tell you, we follow what we do under the province. And we do have 80,000 approved units right across the city of all different types. And there's one that I often talk about right at Cawthra and Atwater. It's been sitting there vacant for 400 purpose-built rentals since 1992. And there's no way that that is going to be going through a planning process or cut and red tape for 32 years. I'm sorry, that's not the case.
We're going to quickly move on if we can. We've reached time on that theme specifically.
He called me bunk. I got to respond to bunk.
That said, you're at a point now where we're moving on to the next theme anyway. So let's get into housing security, which is something that we've just spoken about a couple of times. Unaffordable housing is consistently listed as one of the top reasons that people visit a food bank. 2/3 of the food bank survey respondents reported having $100 or less each month after paying for rent and utilities. With an average income of approximately $40,000, an average home price of $1.1 million is a 200% of take-home pay and is required just for the mortgage. For rentals, it is 100% of the gross income as well for those people to make up for their rent. So this leaves no room absolutely whatsoever for food, utilities, taxes, fees, and other life expenses. We've touched upon homes and housing security to this point. I'm going to offer each of you a minute and a half to share your vision and implementation plan for working with both residents and developers to increase supply of and access to affordable housing here in Mississauga. And again, we're going in a specific order that's been predetermined. Mr. Dasko, you're first.
All right. Well, first of all, it's how we get the permits pulled and how we get the shovels in the ground. And, right now, we don't have a time period in place for once you get something approved from council for a developer to when they actually have to get those permits pulled and get in the ground. I just talked about Atwater and Cawthra, for example. That's one of many that are out there right now. But at the same time, having one group pitted against another group is not the way to get things done. It's working together collaboratively to make sure that we find out how we can get that done. And also, quite frankly, we should be looking at things differently. We should be looking at, there's other models that we have to get funding. At the federal level, we should be looking for inclusionary zoning, for example, that we can actually send off, have a fund available right across the country that you can actually go out and submit from the developer and the municipality to get your affordable housing units for inclusionary zoning paid for as a grant. Take that into your bank as part of your construction financing. Things like that. We need to think differently, and this is the time to be able to do it, but it takes leadership to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving down the line, Mr. Tedjo is next.
So this is a huge problem right now. We absolutely need more housing, but we also need the more right types of housing. We have 32 cranes in the sky right now in the city of Mississauga. That's good. That's good building. But only one of them, only one out of the 32 cranes in the sky right now is a purpose-built rental. Everything else is market housing. Absolutely, we need more market housing, but we need supportive housing, we need affordable housing, we need shelters, we need more 2 and 3 bedrooms for families. We need more housing so that seniors can downsize, so that growing families can have some room, so that newcomers and immigrants and students can have a place to live that's safe and they're not packing them into basements. We have an opportunity right now to tackle this challenge head on. We saw a report yesterday that talked about the average cost of those new rentals, even though there's only one. The average cost is $2,400 for a single bedroom. Think about that. The average salary in the city of Mississauga is $54,000 a year. And do the math, that means you're spending 2/3 of your income, 2/3 of your income on housing, which leaves you $1,000 for food, for clothing, for transportation, for everything else. That's completely unaffordable. I have a very comprehensive plan to tackle this housing crisis head on that we've worked on for months with experts. We want to make it easier to build purpose-built rental, to build affordable housing by unlocking municipal lands, by having a direct path at City Hall for affordable projects that are completely separate from the market projects, because the math is different. The economics are different. We need to understand that and give them a leg up to get these projects approved so that we can have, as of right, purpose-built rentals along our main streets, so that we can have lower fees and waive fees for these applications so that we can get affordable housing built now.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo. Ms. Damerla.
Thank you. There's three things we need to do. We need to build more homes, we need to build them faster, and we need to find a way to reduce the cost of building these homes. And my plan does all of this. I have a plan to fast-track approvals at City Hall. There's no question, at Mississauga, we can do better. But just speeding up approvals is not going to build more homes. Right now, there's somewhere between 50,000 and 80,000 units that have been pre-zoned, and builders can pull the permit, but they have not. So it's not, I'm not saying we don't have to speed up, but there are other factors. There are market factors that are stopping builders from building. And that's why my plan will waive all development charges for purpose-built rentals. The idea is by pulling that government cost out, it becomes more attractive to build purpose-built rentals. I really look forward to Mississauga becoming this mecca of where all the builders are rushing to build purpose-built rentals. The other thing that we need to do is, of course, deeply affordable housing. That's its own issue. What we can do at the City of Mississauga, we need to partner with other levels of government. For every dollar in taxes you pay, the city and the region together collect 10 cents. The province and the federal government, 90 cents. So we need them at the table to build deeply affordable housing, but as mayor, I commit to providing land. City-owned land. I'm willing to provide that for free as a 99-year lease so that it's still Crown land to build deeply affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crombie.
CMHC and StatsCan have made a report just issued past year that say that actually what Mr. Councillor Dasko said is completely wrong. They said that time for approval is one of the biggest impediments to developers developing, and that Mississauga, Toronto as well, Victoria as well, are some of the worst cities in Canada for approval. And they listed Vaughan and Oakville and Burlington, lots of our neighboring cities, as cities where you can actually get approvals done far better. So approval time, I'm sorry, sir, is not bunk. It's actually something that I think that councillors should be elected to make sure that the red tape and regulation is appropriate when it's appropriate, because you don't want everything approved, but is cut when it's not appropriate. The pre-construction condos today are down 71%. And so Councillor Damerla is right. The market forces are challenging today. But people are getting it done when they do innovative things. One thing they're doing is reducing the GST on purpose-built rental. Another thing some people are doing is taking away development fees, not just on purpose-built rentals, but on condos that are below a certain level. You're not going to force developers that have got building permits to build if they can't get their bank financing, if they can't sell the condos, if there's no one there to market. So complaining about that is a little bit disingenuous. The reality is, I think the only way you're going to get things going is by reducing the development fees that the city take right now. That's the only way you're going to do it, by speeding up the approvals. And another proposal I've made is that around major transit areas, increase the density by 20%. If they're going to have 40 stories, give them 48 stories. But half of that increase has got to be affordable housing. Affordable housing through inclusionary zoning has worked in 18 cities around North America. There's 2 cities that didn't do it, Toronto and Mississauga. We should be a little bit innovative. Why don't you look what has happened in Texas and think about that actually is a good idea I could bring to Mississauga rather than saying it's bull. Like this is, you got to get some new thinking in City Hall. You got to, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Crombie. As mentioned when we were Dealing with our previous theme, this theme we do also have a couple of individual questions for specific candidates. We're going to begin with Mr. Tedjo. You'll have 2 minutes to respond. You brought the motion on fourplexes to council. There are some concerns, obviously, to address NIMBYism. How do you go about doing that to make sure that you're prioritizing the affordability needs of those who actually have to get into that housing?
Thanks, Mark. I'm really proud of that motion because we talked a lot about how we're trying to build communities, right? And I think fourplexes are a bit misunderstood. I actually live in a fourplex. You just don't think of it as one. I live in a semi-detached house that has a basement apartment on both sides, and it was built 50 years ago, and they are all over the city of Mississauga. We've legalized this, and we've allowed this to happen in the city of Mississauga for generations, and we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to do that in a responsible way. But we need everyone to understand and to have the thought around where are people going to live, where are their kids going to live, where are their friends and family going to live. My parents are seniors. They're now on a fixed income. I want my parents to be close so they can babysit my kids so that I can come to debates like this tonight, right? We want our families to be nearby. We don't want to have to travel to Brantford or Waterloo or wherever else people are trying to find housing now. But we have an entire generation of people who can't afford to live in this community. Nurses, teachers, doctors, everyone is struggling to find a place to live. And we're talking about neighborhoods that have lost significant population, including my own. In my own neighborhood, we've lost people over the last 10 years, so much so that we've closed several of the schools in the neighborhood. And that is a direct result of us not having enough growth and enough building and enough population in our area. So if we want to save our communities, if we want to save our schools and our neighborhoods, we need to allow more housing in those communities. Gentle density is what we're talking about. We're not changing the landscape of these existing communities. We're talking about allowing conversions within the existing zoning that already is there, right? We're talking about garden suites so that people have a place to live and that we can even open up to the idea of multi-generational homes in our own communities. That's the fabric of our community that makes it so great, is the people that are there, and we need to give them a place to live, and I'm really proud of my policy to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open up the floor, we have one more specific question for one of the candidates, Ms. Damerla, from Michelle Billick, one of the community organizers we hear from here in Mississauga quite often. Mississauga has seen a rise in homeless encampments, obviously, and shelters are at 400% over capacity. What policies and or programs do you commit to working with the region on to ensure that the vulnerable unhoused community members can access homes that they can afford?
So, thank you for the question, Michelle. It's a terrific question, and Michelle, you know that I've been advocating and standing up for Mississauga on this issue. Michelle, you talked about the fact that our shelters are at 400% of capacity. One of the reasons they are at 400% of capacity is because the asylum seekers are being forced to come to our shelters because we do not have purpose-built housing for the asylum seekers who are coming. And so they're being forced into our shelters, and that's why they're at 400%. And that's a problem. And I have been advocating with the federal government for more than a year that Mississauga and the region of Peel is happy to provide supports and set the asylum seekers up for success. But we need the federal government at the table. We need them to fund us because, as you've heard, there's an affordability crisis. We cannot continue to put these costs on the property tax base, and that's what I've been advocating for. And I do want to say, I want to congratulate Regional Council and the region of Peel. We've actually come up with a made-in-Peel solution, because right now what we are doing is we are housing asylum seekers in hotels and motels. That does not set them up for success, and also it's not the best use of money. So the region of Peel actually has a plan to build dormitory-style housing for asylum seekers where they can stay for a short while we set them up so that, then they can get a job and then they can move on to more permanent housing. We need the federal government at the table to help us do this. We have the solutions. We need senior levels of government to partner with us, and I've been leading the fight on this, and I will continue to do that as mayor. Thank you.
Now's the time for us to open up the floor on this topic specifically, housing security. We'll start with Mr. Crombie this time.
We talked earlier about fourplexes. I want to talk about that if I can, because I think it's one of these woke ideas that you know, you put up there as a big idea, but not much happens about it. There was less than 50 fourplexes built in Toronto. Fourplexes aren't the solution. Right now, triplexes are allowed already. There hasn't been much movement on triplexes. And why? CMHC, did you know this? CMHC actually won't give a builder or anyone a loan unless it's 5 or more units. And the reason why is because they know that the fourplexes are difficult to build, difficult to get financed, difficult to get quality contractors for, et cetera. It's not a way to actually move the needle. So do I think that you know, fourplexes in the right places might make sense? Yes, but thinking that it's a panacea for Mississauga, you know, just ask yourself, do you want to have a fourplex every single street in Mississauga? Do you want to have 4 times as many cars, 4 times as large driveways, 4 times more parking on the streets? I don't think that makes sense. The proposal that went to Toronto City Council today to allow greater density along major arterials, that actually might make a lot of sense. And then the Liberal Party in Ontario just a couple of months ago said that rather than fourplexes, what we want is 6 stories everywhere. Do you want 6 stories everywhere? And they admitted in a report that the fourplex was just a step to what they really wanted to get to, which was 6 stories anywhere. I don't think that's what we want. The only way to solve this is density around transit nodes, because the people that are going to be able to, the people that we need to house are those people that can't afford housing plus cars. They're going to be using transit. We're not going to be running buses down every cul-de-sac in Mississauga. We'd like to, but it's not going to happen. We got to be realistic. So I think there is solutions, and the solutions is cutting development fees. Mississauga has got some of the highest development fees, and if you want to get action right now, cut the development fees and cut it this year if people get into the ground. Give more developers more density, but ask for something in exchange. And I think that the most important thing you can do to change...
We do have to offer opportunity for other people to get their time in the 5 minutes.
Unlike most of the debates that don't give me an opportunity, I'm happy to give people an opportunity.
It will be Mr. Tedjo first, then Mr. Dasko.
Thank you, Mark. You know, I'm really proud of the motion that Councillor Hornick and I did at the region last year, that we were talking about how to house asylum seekers, and we looked at modular housing. We turned that and transitioned that to dormitory-style housing, and now, out of the 3 that we were trying to build in the city of Mississauga, the only one that is built in my community. It's actually right on top of my campaign office, where we're housing 300 asylum seekers. And on fourplexes, the federal government is funding it. They're funding it. We're using the $113 million that we earned through passing this motion to transit-orient development and include fourplexes as part of that plan to reduce and eliminate the DCs, so the federal government is supporting that plan. But this is a way that we need to move forward. We need to strike it at all aspects. It's gentle density in existing neighborhoods, and it's intensification around transit nodes. It's absolutely 6 stories as of right along major streets, and especially around transit corridors. We need to implement all these plans, and it sounds like Brian's been reading mine, so that's great. I appreciate that. And I think these are good ideas that we need to keep moving forward. Thank you.
Mr. Dasko.
Well, thank you. And first of all, with regards to fourplexes, I'll tell you, I voted to abstain, which was a vote in the negative. And why? Is because what we always prided ourselves in Mississauga was doing our homework, doing our consultation, not dragging things out. There's no NIMBYism. It's blanket zoning right across an entire municipality for what you think is a large amount of money, which is not actually really not that. That's not city building. And if you're building fourplexes on $4 or $5 million lots that aren't close to transit and don't have the infrastructure to be able to deal with it, quite frankly, you're not tackling the real issue. When a report that just came out on Monday from the city said that we might get 300 to 500 units a year. And so far, we've got 2 to 3, and 2 of them are actually in the ward that I represent right now. And so looking out and actually addressing the real cause here and thinking out of the box, we need to be looking at how we finance and actually get affordable units built. Things like community bonds. Hamilton's doing it. I think this makes a whole ton of sense. And back to what I was mentioning again, going back to that government level of government with the real financial firepower that is always talking right now about housing and that, you know, how to get things done right away. Well, you know what? It's time for them to step up right now and think a little bit differently. Think with the municipalities that actually do the planning. those that are there to do the planning, that actually live this stuff every day and are tasked by the province to come up with official plans, to put those in place and say, you know what, how do we make this work as opposed to you shall do it? I don't think a you shall do it fixes that, because you can't fix somebody to actually pull a permit to get in the ground. But what you need to do is get everybody together to make sure that we get those results that we need. Thank you.
That is our time for this theme. We're going to be moving on to the next one at this point, income security. Obviously helping those who have low incomes at this point. Ontario has 2 social assistance programs to help those in poverty, of course, Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Support Program. 1 in 4 households that visit food banks rely on Ontario Works as their primary source of income. But the program does not provide enough to afford basic needs, and the program parameters make it difficult to get out of poverty. We'll start with this question. The government of Ontario recently made improvements to the ODSP by committing to inflationary increases to rates and changing earned income clawbacks, but Ontario Works has been frozen since 2018. How will you work with the province to increase social assistance so Ontario Works recipients receive the income increase they desperately need? This time, we begin with Mr. Tedjo.
You know, I grew up in Mississauga. I was a little kid. We were 4 years old. We moved to the city. And every couple of nights, my parents would bring home different things. And I never thought about it. My dad would always bring pizza from Pizza Nova. My mom would always bring home Socialet. And then I didn't realize this until I was older. It was because my dad was a pizza driver for Pizza Nova. And my mom worked at Socialet to learn English. And that's what they did as immigrants. They worked hard. They got an education. And they pushed themselves up further as much as they could. People are struggling right now, and they're working hard. They're working harder than ever. People can't work enough and make ends meet still. ODSP and Ontario Works is woefully underfunded. Yes, the increases in inflation, fine. That's a good first step. But the fact that Ontario Works hasn't been increased in real dollars in decades is a shame. It's a travesty. We can't support people by just relying on the provincial government. Right? We don't have enough in the system right now for them to survive. And so we're picking up the slack. In a previous election, I talked a lot about our universal basic income because of the dignity that it provides people to pay for the basics, to pay for food, to pay for shelter. And my wife, Rebecca, works in the emergency room, and she sees all the time people who use the healthcare system as a way to get shelter, a way to get out of the cold, as a way to get a meal. But that's not what we should be using it for. The cost of a universal basic income, the cost of income support up front actually saves the government money in terms of the support afterwards. Look up $1 Million Murray. This is a homeless person who lived for decades in the system and was supported by so many different programs. Had they just given him the money up front, he could have been successful. That's the type of program that we need here in Ontario.
Next up, Ms. Damerla.
You know, one of the things I like to say is that great cities are not cities with the tallest buildings or the best museums. Great cities are places where people can get ahead, where you can work hard and build a better life for yourself and your children. That's the aspiration I have for Mississauga. And you know, when I read about people struggling to make ends meet in such a wealthy country, we need to do better. So one of the first things that I would do, and I do want to say that, you know, kudos to the provincial government for indexing it to inflation, but it's not enough because the base is too low. You're trying to index Ontario Works when the Ontario Works base is so low. So I would work with the provincial government collaboratively to increase that base. That is critical because if you cannot, if the Ontario Works is so low that you have to rely on a food bank, you may as well increase the Ontario Works. I think the provincial government understands that. I think that with me as a mayor for Mississauga, I will know because I worked at Queen's Park, I've served in cabinet, I know how Queen's Park works. I do believe that I will know how to navigate Queen's Park and get them to understand that it's a win-win when the social safety net is robust enough that people can lead a life of dignity. So that would definitely be one of my #1 priorities. The clawback, increasing the clawback is welcome, but I know that poverty advocates have been saying that it's not enough, and I would agree. We do want to incent people to go ahead and work, and clawing it back removes that incentive, so we really need to look at, removing those clawbacks. So those are some of the things that I would focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. A reminder, we have 1.5 minutes for each of your comments. Mr. Crombie.
We just heard that she wants to work collaboratively with Queen's Park. Then before that, we heard that she's been advocating strongly. You know what? You do the same thing over and over again, you get the same result. You think you're going to get a different result. That's what Einstein called the definition of insanity. You know what? We had Fair Share Peel 20 years ago that then became Metamorphosis. We are getting underfunded, and we've been underfunded for more than 2 decades. At some point in time, you people have got to rise up and say what we've been doing, who we've been electing, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe we should try something different. Elect the same people all the time, over and over again. You know what we're going to be? What Metamorphosis said, dead last of urban centers in regards to funding. I'm going to raise one other issue if I could. You know what? We were in Malton. Some of us were in Malton last night. Some people didn't show up. But we were in Malton last night. You know where the best public transit is in Mississauga? Where the people most in need live, right? No. Best public transit is where the richest people in Mississauga live. The worst public transit is where the people most in need live. The problem we've got is too many politicians do stuff only for those people that vote. With 20% turnout, and those turnout being primarily the more well-to-do homeowners, older people, the reality is we don't get the right results for the people that are most in need. We need to elect people that really care and are going to put transit in Malton and are going to be not working cooperatively with people that say, thanks for coming. That it's going to be with people that are going to actually make a difference. Make a difference. We should not be dead last. And are you happy being dead last?
That's your
Then
time.
do something about it.
Okay, we're going to get to Mr. Dasko. You have 1.5 minutes. How will you work with the province to increase social assistance?
Well, right now, I think the common theme is what's happening right now is not working. A livable wage is something that is always escaping everybody. When you start to increase and you try to lift up the base to what is right now basically the floor, just to make that gap, you're not really closing the gap, you're just making it less painful for somebody, and you're not actually helping anybody, you're perpetuating what somebody is actually going through right now. And so to tackle that head on and to actually sit down, yes, we've had advocacy groups. Fair Share for Peel has been one around for a while. Metamorphosis came out of the dissolution that was talked about with the Hazel McCallion Act. But really, it's coming down and this is time that we're at with the city of Mississauga right now, that we turn the page, that we have somebody that is dedicated, that's passionate, that wants to sit around and deal with everybody that wants to help out to be a part of the solution. And I'll tell you, I believe the will is there right now, but everybody is doing something differently and everybody's playing some sort of a blame game, and we're not getting anywhere. And the whole thing is we're there for the people that need the problem, that are in a problem, that need help. And if you lose track of that, that kind of politics needs to go. And we need to come in and solve the real problems at hand, and that's what happens when you have, I believe, a leader that wants to work with everybody to make sure that we get the right results. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to our individual questions. Mr. Crombie, you're up. You referenced just a moment ago the Metamorphosis Network reports and the provincial underfunding in Peel Region. More specifically, how will you use your platform to advocate for better funding?
So yesterday, the Toronto Star had a report that Mississauga was the 10th most livable city. And they had Vaughan and Milton and Burlington and Oakville, all of our neighboring cities, as more livable. We've got a problem. And so the answer to your question is, I think, obviously, we need change. The reality is, if we have turnout of 20%, which is what we had last time, and you're all happy with same old, I'm not going to get elected. It's going to be Carolyn Parrish or one of the existing councillors that's going to get elected. And we're going to have, I think, the same result. I have had the pleasure of meeting some of the other potential candidates for mayor. You've got some pretty impressive people that are putting their names forward. I'm not the only one. There's some pretty impressive people. One sitting there, one sitting there. There's others in the audience. Where's Be Alive? He's back here. You know, really impressive, thank you, Be Alive. Really impressive people that have got really interesting ideas. And the first thing that they asked me when I came in, the reporter said, Mr. Crombie, you're way down in the polls. Why? You know what I wanted to say? Turn the mirror on yourself, Mr. Reporter. Because when the Toronto media only interviews these people and has only an address of a horse race and doesn't let anyone else actually have a chance to speak to you, that's the result that you're going to get. You know, it's not democracy. Peterborough is interesting. Peterborough is interesting because what happened is they allowed online voting. And in the advanced polls and in the in-person polls, the incumbent was leading. But the incumbent lost to a young person on election day because the online results came in. There are young people in this city. There are people that aren't the wealthy, well-to-do homeowners in this city that want to get involved. But the reporters in this room, you got to educate who they are. And you got to give people an opportunity. So I got to tell you, if you want the same result as you've had, which is you're going to be 10th most livable city, the dead last in funding from the provincial government, with $864 million less in funding from the provincial government. Elect Carolyn Parrish for mayor, because that's what you're going to get. If you don't want that, consider voting for someone new that is passionate, that could make a change. And I am in the development business. I know what it will take to get people to build buildings, to build transit. I'm chair of Transit Alliance. I know what can get that going. But you know what's going to happen? 20% of the people are going to show up, and you're going to get the exact same result. Because none of you are mad enough about the crisis that we're in, with taxes too high, houses unaffordable, crime going up. I could go through the list. And no vision for what Mississauga could be, where Mississauga could be in the future. What have we talked about in regards to waterfront retail entertainment, wonderful parks, better transit? We need a mayor that's got some vision. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Once again, it's time to open the floor. You have 5 minutes to speak with one another. We're going to start here with Ms. Damerla, and then we'll head over to Mr. Tedjo.
So speaking about ensuring fair share for Mississauga, I want to share a story. I was actually at the cabinet table when Mississauga's funding for children's services was increased, primarily because it was underfunded. And Sean Meager, you're sitting here, and you probably remember that. So yes, when there is a political will, fairness can be achieved, and I was at the table when that fairness was achieved in that sector. Since then, things have gone south again. And I want to say to Brian, there's a time to stand up and fight, and there's a time when you work with everybody. And you have to pick your moments. And I have the experience, and I've done this. We've done this at the cabinet table where we increased funding for Mississauga for children's services. And it didn't come up all the way, but it came up significantly. And my commitment is yes. Since I've been elected, I've been hearing about fair share for Mississauga. When I was at the cabinet table, I was the minister from Mississauga along with MPPs from Mississauga. We got it done. As mayor, I will get it done.
We're
Mr.
dead
Tedjo.
last. We're
Mr.
dead
Tedjo,
last.
please.
Thank you, Mark. You know, there's a lot that we need to do. We're a big city. We got big city, we got big problems, we need big solutions to do that, right? We need people who know how to get that stuff done, right? Brian is very passionate about what he's talking about, and that's good. That's good, we need that. I am not a career politician. I've been here for the last 2 years, less than 2 years. But I understand how City Hall works and how we can get things done. And while I've been on council, I've been able to work with the federal government to secure the $113 million, work with the provincial government on transit. I've worked with every councillor on the stage who's running, with Councillor Dasko on supporting our BIAs in the south, with Councillor Damerla on parking minimums, and with Councillor Parrish on the fourplexes. And before that, I had a career in government. I had a career supporting government, advocating for government to get parental leave for every single family in Canada, to expand parental leave services, to expand childcare. And when I was a student leader, I got a tuition freeze and then tuition freeze program. That's my career. That's what I want to keep doing. I want to fight for you. I want to fight for Mississaugans to get the best deal moving forward, and I have a track record that shows that I've done that. Thank you.
We've got 2.5 minutes left. Mr. Dasko, you are next.
All right, well, thank you very much. having announcements made is one thing. Having that follow through is the other. And I do recall, as a matter of fact, in the former government, I think it was the Wynne government that's been referred to, I was on the board of Community Living Mississauga. And at the time, there was an announcement made that there was going to be the largest windfall, essentially, that came into community living in Ontario in its history. And I'll tell you, what I asked at the time was we go out and we make sure that there was followed through. We had a timeline in place. We found out when the money was going to come in, what we had to put out, because the devil's always in the details, and that's the kind of person that I am. I always look at the details and see things followed through. Well, I'll tell you what happened at the end of all that. Next to no money actually came in, because the posts were set so far out and you had to jump through so many hoops that the funding never actually showed up. And that's Community Living Mississauga, which does an incredible amount of great work and has got an incredible reputation. And that's something that tragically happened with them, and not just Community Living Mississauga, but community living organizations right across the province. This is one, I use that as an example. I mention it all the time because it's always in the follow through and in the detail. And right now, this is an opportunity that we actually set the course, but we have that ongoing dialogue. We make sure that people are accountable, and we make sure that, quite frankly, everybody here and everybody in the city of Mississauga is kept in the loop of what the heck's happening. Those status reports are always in, something that you have to do. Since I was elected as councillor, I've had over 500 community consultations because I keep people up to date and informed, and I ask the questions. What the heck do you think? Because that's the most important thing to getting something done, is to reaching out on the ground to find out what we need to get solutions. And that's the kind of leadership that we need. Thank you.
Mr. Crombie, you have your hand up. A reminder, 20 seconds left on the clock.
I was in Malton yesterday. In 2011, I helped run a campaign in Malton, and the number one issue was the Goreway Bridge. You know what's finally being built 13 years later is the Goreway Bridge. 2014, I helped run a campaign. You know what the number one issue was? All day, two-way go on the Milton-Mississauga line. You've seen it, right? Your council is fighting for you, and they're getting results. They're not. They're not. Make a change. Be alive.
Okay, that concludes our three themes that we had approached the debate with tonight. We do have time. We're going to go to additional questions, more open debate. Every candidate will get their opportunity. We will have 5 minutes per question. The first one comes from the new majority. Mississauga is increasingly young, increasingly diverse. What lived experience do you bring to support this changing community and improve the lives of young people in Mississauga? We're going to start with the podium next to me, Ms. Damerla.
Thank you. You know, a very close family member, I watched them for the past 4 years trying to buy a home. I watched them for 4 years put bid after bid after bid and not be able to buy a home. And in those 4 years, they managed to get married. They managed to have a baby last month, but they still have not been able to buy a home. So I understand how hard it is for young people. And I understand how hard it is to move from another country, move here and try and make a better life for yourself. I understand that. I understand these struggles. When I first landed here, I had all these high hopes, big dreams, and they came crashing down because I was told that my academic qualifications were equal to grade 12. I was a chartered accountant from India. I had a Bachelor of Commerce, and I was told I'm a grade 12. I was devastated. What kind of a life am I going to have? What kind of a future am I going to build? And what about the sacrifices of my family that spent so much money on my education in India? But I didn't give up. I managed to get an MBA from the University of Toronto, Rotman School of Management and Finance, and went on to work in corporate banking before getting into politics. I just share this to say, I understand the experiences of diverse communities. I understand what it's made to feel like that you're not good enough and then have to work that much harder to prove that you are good enough. I understand that for the young. I understand that for anyone who has ambition, anyone who wants to get ahead, wants to work hard, but is being denied the opportunities. I have all of the lived experiences required to be the mayor of this wonderful, diverse city that I call home. Thank you.
Okay, we'll open it up. Anyone else want to address the question? Lived experience to help young people and the diverse population here in Mississauga. Mr. Crombie.
I have a nightly radio show, 6 o'clock on 960 AM. Tonight I've got Michelle Billick on the show talking about food issues. Last week I had the head of Prosperity Canada talking about Missy Middle, and he actually said the opposite of what Councillor Dasko said. On Tuesday of next week, I've got the chief economist of the CMHC talking about how critically important development fees are. I've interviewed over 1,500 people. Last Friday, I had 2 immigrants to Mississauga, young females talking about the challenges. Last Monday, I had 4 of the young mayor candidates talking about the challenges of getting people motivated. I've listened to those people, and I've not just listened, but I've broadcast their fears, their concerns, their challenges to a growing audience. And I think that's really important. And I respect Councillor Damerla's experience. I had, and you're going to laugh at this maybe, but I had a similar experience. I went to Harvard Business School, and I was a Canadian. And being a Canadian in a U.S. environment, I was in the foreign student quadrant. I pronounced about wrong and process wrong, and they made fun of me. And you know what? It was interesting for me to be a minority in the great United States of America. I didn't stand up and know the Pledge to Allegiance. It is interesting and fascinating to be an immigrant. And I actually was rewarded in my own self for that experience. So I've had, not as dramatic as your experience, clearly. I wasn't a different color, I wasn't a different language, but I was thought of as a minority, and I was treated like a minority. I had to fight through that.
Okay,
but if you
Mr.
get
Crombie,
a chance,
I'm going to
check
move on
out
to our
960
next speaker, if
AM.
you would. Mr. Tedjo first, then Mr. Dasko, approximately 1 minute each.
Sorry. I'm going to keep this positive. You know, there's Future Majority we've met with a number of times. I've met with a number of times. We've got some phenomenal young leaders here who understand the challenges of our city, who want to see a city that they can live in that has affordable housing that they can access, that has a transit system they can use, that has safe cycling networks. And I can relate to that. I grew up here. I went to Father Michael Gates High School. I worked at Sheridan College for a number of years. I've seen this city change over the last 4 decades, and I'm proud of what we've done. I love this city, and I know that we can do better. I know that we can do better on so many ways. We have one of the most diverse cities in the world. We need to celebrate that. We need to find ways to bring people together and have this be the example of how we can live together, how we can celebrate each other. We've done so much for that, but we need to do so much more. And we need to show that representation everywhere we go. Thank you.
Mr. Dasko, 1 minute, please.
One of the most important assets that we have here in the city of Mississauga is our diversity. But our diversity, it's not all equal, and that's the problem that we have. It's setting up that platform for success for everybody. It doesn't matter who the heck you are, or who you've come from, or who you love, or anything like that. It's everybody needs to have the same ability to get ahead. And this is what Mississauga has that incredible opportunity to be right now as we go forward. Our strength really is in our diversity, and it's setting up the environment for everybody. It's having those opportunities. And this is, does a government be able to solve all the problems or cure everything? No, but you can set that environment, and this is the opportunity to be able to do that because we have the entire globe right here in Mississauga. This is something that's pretty incredible. There's a lot of hurt also out there right now, and it's something that we can lead by example because can we solve all the world's problems right now? We can't, but can we lead and show people and provide people with that support system that you know that when you're coming into Mississauga, I don't care where you're from, you've got the same ability to get ahead as everybody else. And this is the example that we need to have. Right, make sure that everybody can rise up and have an opportunity in life and raise a family and enjoy what I think is a good quality of life, not just for one person, but for everybody.
Thank you very much. We do have a question from our audience. It's a question not just from the audience, but probably from a lot of people, both in the city, the GTA, and in other municipalities throughout the province. Very simple one. In what situations would you use your strong mayoral powers should you be elected? Once again, we'll start from this end of the stage. Ms. Damerla.
I do not expect to have to use strong mayor powers. You know, one of my role models is Hazel McCallion. She was a strong mayor, but she never had to use strong mayor powers because they didn't exist. And here's the thing about strong mayor powers. In the short run, maybe the mayor gets one or two things done. But in the long run, you create an in-group and an out-group, right? Because now you're using minority votes to get your will through instead of being able to bring all of council together. To me, a good mayor, a good leader is someone who can build consensus and get council together. And think about this. Typically what happens with this is you have the mayor just needs 3 or 4 votes to pass whatever strong mayor legislation he or she wants. And then a clique is formed, and then there's the council dynamics. It just becomes dysfunctional. And then there are entire parts of the city with councillors who have no voice. That's not the kind of council I want to lead. I believe that I will be able to build consensus to inspire people. You know, we keep talking about the fact that housing, we need strong mayor powers for housing. Here's my take. There's a real housing shortage in Canada. And Mississauga, we have a question to ask ourselves. Are we just going to stand, be bystanders, or are we going to lead in this housing shortage? I believe that the good people of Mississauga want to be leaders, that 10 years from now, 5 years from now, we can look back and say, Mississauga did its part. This was a national crisis, and Mississauga did its part in building homes. So I believe that the people will be with me, and I believe that council will be with me. As long as we build consensus, we're reasonable, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We know that we have to build more homes, but we have to manage the growth. So I don't believe I'm going to need to use strong mayor powers. Thank you.
1 minute each, Mr. Crombie and Mr. Dasko, then Mr. Tedjo. 1 minute to address the question, please. Yes.
I think strong mayor powers are a travesty. They're the opposite of democracy. I think that anyone that makes use of them should be aghast. I think it would be comparable to the use of the notwithstanding clause in the Canadian Constitution, that thing that's there that you never, ever, ever want to use. And I think that people that use it are admitting that they don't have the leadership capability to bring a council around them, and I think it's wrong. The councillor said that we've got, equality here in Mississauga. We don't, admit it. This campaign has proven that we don't have equality. They've only been allowing the 4 councillors on stage every time except maybe tonight, which is the first time, and there's, as I mentioned, great people that are not here. We have 21% turnout. The people are voting with their feet. They don't think municipal democracy is relevant. They don't think that they have a voice. CBC had this listening thing yesterday. 60 people showed up, and they were excited about actually being listened to, being heard. That's what we need to do more of, listen to the people. So you know what I would do is I would have a referendum on fourplexes. I'd have a referendum on the dissolution of Mississauga from Peel, or maybe something different, going the opposite direction. I'd let the people decide, and maybe then you'd actually get some good turnout.
Mr. Dasko, 1 minute, please, on strong mayor powers.
Thank you very much. The strong mayor powers, I was against that all the way through when it was being proposed. I didn't think it was appropriate. We've always operated by building consensus around the council table. This is where the best decisions are made, after consulting everybody as well. You know, to come out and mandate something as strong mayor powers do, I think it erodes the democratic process. It erodes what you should be doing, and that's you should be building consensus. That's my history. That's my track record. I do that each and every day that I serve the community, and walking around and making sure that we've got good decisions. I believe good decisions by doing our homework and then consulting as well to make sure that we've got the right decisions. But strong mayor powers, that to me is the shortcut out, and it's not acceptable to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tedjo.
So we have real crises, right? We have a real affordability crisis. We have a real housing crisis. We have people living on the street. We have people packing our shelters at 400% capacity. You have a crisis on your hand, you have to use every tool available in the toolkit. That doesn't mean you use it willy-nilly. That doesn't mean you use it recklessly. It means you use it when you have to. Obviously, you don't want to. You never want to. But you want to find that consensus. You want to find that way to work with everybody and build as a team. But you also have to know that that team is 11 individual councilors representing individual neighborhoods, and that the mayor is the only person who has to represent everybody and has to bring everybody together. And they have a mandate from the entirety of the city to get things done for the community. And that includes housing. That includes affordability. And if you need to use it, then use it. The one time that the mayor used it, that one time that Mayor Crombie used it was for fourplexes, because Councillor Dasko and Councillor Damerla voted against that. And we had a tie vote, and she brought it back so that we could vote on it, get $113 million from the federal government, and fast-track more housing during this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've now reached that point. Thank you to each of the candidates for their thoughtful responses to questions throughout tonight's debate. Covering a number of important themes, obviously crucial issues here in Mississauga. Each of you will now have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. This is your opportunity to summarize what you've offered tonight and, of course, speak to the voters. We're going to start from the other end. Mr. Tedjo, you're first.
Well, first, let me start by saying thank you to everyone who braved the warmness of this room, to Food Banks Mississauga for bringing us together and to give us a platform to talk about these incredibly, incredibly important issues. We're talking about the lives of the people who live in our city, our neighbors, our friends, our family. And we need to decide how we're going to help them. Are we going to help them? Are we going to do everything that we can to make sure that this is a city that they can continue to live in, that they can actually thrive in this city, that they have a safe transportation network to get around this city, and that they have a future in this city? I really mean it. I love my kids. My kids are 9, 11, and 13. It takes 10 years to get some of these projects off the ground. My brother and sister still live with my parents in their 30s. So many people are struggling right now. We have a real crisis, and you have a choice. The voters of Mississauga have a real choice for the first time in decades to decide the future of this city. Are we going to learn from the challenges that we've presented ourselves in how we built the city, and then try to undo that and fix it and build a better one? Or are we going to continue on the path that we've been going down? I love this city. I continue to believe in the people of the city and continue to believe that we are aspirational people who want better transit, who want more affordability, who want more housing in the city that they know that their friends and family can live in, and that they can age in and they can retire in, because this is the community that they love being in. I believe in us. I believe that we can do better. I believe we can build that better future for our city. And I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight for every one of you every single day that I might get the honor of being your mayor, to make sure that this becomes the best city in Canada, the most livable city, and the city that actually plans and fights for its future. Thank you so much.
Mr. Dasko, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you again to Food Banks Mississauga for hosting tonight. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you again very much for moderating. This is truly, I believe, our most important election that we are going to be facing as the city of Mississauga right now. We've got a turning point in the city. I believe that we want a city that that's going to include everybody in this city, that's going to have opportunity for everybody, that's not going to be stuck in the past, that we're moving forward. It's where we're going next. We need a strong new mayor for today and for tomorrow. But this is recognizing that we do have challenges, but we also have incredible opportunity. And it's somebody that is going to go forward that's got no other level of government in mind other than right here in Mississauga to roll up our sleeves to make sure that we've got the leadership to take us as a council and as a city in a future forward-thinking direction that's got world-class transit, that's got world-class job opportunities right here in Mississauga, that's going to take everybody up, that will never let anybody fall through the cracks and make sure that we all have an opportunity in life to get ahead. This is a Mississauga for everybody. It's the most diverse city that we've got. It needs to be celebrated, and this is truly a time of city building, and this is what we need with this strong new mayor for today and tomorrow, and that's why I'm running. And on June 10th, I ask for your support to vote for me, Stephen Dasko. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 2 minutes, Mr. Crombie.
I think I've already said several times that I think we need to change things, and that's up to you to decide. But I think the other thing is that we've lost our vision for what Mississauga could be about. I think Mayor Hazel McCallion, she built Celebration Square, City Hall, Living Arts Center, Hershey Center. We built things. We aspired to greatness in Mississauga. I don't know what we've done lately. I'm going to give you a couple of ideas, if I could, to get you thinking. We've got an 18-acre area in Port Credit, a 150,000 square foot warehouse that sits empty with boats and geese. If this was in Vancouver, they'd turn it into Granville Island Market. If it was in Chicago, it would be a wharf. If it was in Baltimore, it would be the Inner Harbor. There are 19 cities in North America today proposing or constructing waterfront retail entertainment because it's what people want. You know what your council did? They approved 10 more condos. We've got the third largest urban park in North America.
True, Brian.
You take a look at Riverdale, Pinchin Farms, and Arundel Conservation Areas, it's 551 acres. It's the third largest urban park. Is it as significant as Central Park is to Manhattan or Stanley Park is to Vancouver? No, because we haven't planned it right. We haven't done the right things. We have been talking about all-day two-way go on the Milton-Mississauga line forever. It has an 8-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. If we build it, it would be equivalent to a surface subway in Mississauga. And we don't have the advocates that go out and demand it. But for some reason, Scarborough does and gets the Scarborough extension, or Shepherd Subway gets the extension, or they get it to Vaughan. What's wrong with us? Maybe we, go and talk to them, but we don't advocate strongly enough. And one more, the Britannia Farms. Have you seen it? It's at Bristol Road in here, Ontario. It's, I think it's 120 acres or something like that. It's sat fallow forever. We haven't done anything with it. In Toronto, it would be Riverdale Farms. In North York, it would be Black Creek Pioneer Village. It's been given to the people of Peel for educational purposes. It could be and should be a working farm, an agricultural farm. It's got a sugar bush. Why don't we take kids there? We have lost a vision for greatness in Mississauga, and we need to grab it back again. And if you don't elect me, elect someone that's got some vision, please.
That's your time, sir. 2 minutes, Mr. Damerla.
You have a choice in this election between me and Carolyn Parrish. I'm the only candidate who can beat Carolyn Parrish. Luckily, we are nothing like each other.
Oh, wow.
You will never hear me make inappropriate comments about diverse communities. I will be a fair mayor, an inclusive mayor. I love this city. This is where I've raised my daughter, run a small business, had the honor of serving as the member of provincial parliament for Mississauga, the honor of serving in cabinet and representing all of Ontario, and now as a city councillor. And all of this experience has prepared me for today to be the mayor Mississauga needs. Someone who will stand up for Mississauga, someone who has the courage to make difficult decisions and get things done. And yes, I want to build more housing, but I also want to manage growth. And yes, I want to keep your property taxes affordable. And yes, I want to tackle crime. But I have a bigger ambition. I want to build a city where everyone has the opportunity to get ahead, to build a better life for themselves and their families, where everyone feels like they belong. Because as I said earlier, the greatest cities are not the ones with the highest towers or the best museums. They truly are great when people, everyday people from anywhere in the world, can come and get ahead, make a better life for themselves. That's my vision for Mississauga. That's why I'm running. On June 10th, I ask for your support. Thank you so much.
And with that, that wraps up our time tonight. Thank you very much to each of the candidates for being here tonight and participating. And of course, those of you in our audience, both here and our audience watching on CityNews 24/7 or citynews.ca. You can watch highlights tonight on CityNews at 11 as well. A big thank you, of course, to the Food Banks Mississauga for hosting tonight's debate. Please be sure to support the organization moving forward and visit foodbanksmississauga.ca. We hope this debate helped you better understand each candidate's vision and, of course, their platform as well.